Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to part two, or the second part of the Civil War slideshow introduction. Our next chunk or topic is the Emancipation Proclamation. Everyone say emancipation. Emancipation means to be liberated from slavery. A proclamation is an announcement. So, a few years into the Civil War, it reached a stalemate. A stalemate is when both sides are winning and losing, and there's like the war is not coming to a conclusion. It just keeps going on and on. One side wins, and the other side wins. And what you're looking at here is a painting of the bloody Battle of Antietam. And this was considered the bloodiest day in American history. It was a battle that took the lives of nearly 25,000 men in one day. It was a Union victory, but it was at the cost of a lot of troops. In response to Antietam, Lincoln realized that this war was at a stalemate and it wasn't going anywhere. So he issued a presidential order called the Emancipation Proclamation. The order would legally free all slaves in seceded and rebellious Confederate states. So it basically said all the slaves in the South are free. Now, it did not free slaves in the border states, because remember, those border states stayed with the Union. But the states that had seceded, those slaves are now legally free based on this presidential order. This is why people sometimes say Lincoln freed the slaves. He did not, however. The 13th Amendment would do that. But the purpose behind this proclamation was to give a new reason for fighting the war, which was the ending of slavery, and to inspire slaves in the South to rise up against the Confederacy. He was hoping to cripple the South, Lincoln was, and this really was a military order. It was not like, hey, slaves are people too, they deserve their freedom. It was, how do we win this war, right? How do we change what the war is about, and how do we hurt the South in a way that we can win? Another result of the Emancipation Proclamation was that it encouraged black soldiers to enlist and fight in the war. The first and most famous black regiment, a regiment is like a platoon of soldiers, was the 54th Massachusetts. They had risked their lives for the cause of abolition, and they were all defeated at the Battle of Fort Wagner, where the entire regiment died. And their efforts and bravery inspired thousands of more black soldiers to join and fight in this war. So, question, how did the Emancipation Proclamation change the Civil War? Our next chunk is called War Affects Society. What you're looking at here is a painting of one of the most famous battles in history. It's called the Battle of Gettysburg. It was a Union victory that put them ahead in the war, and it was also a bloodbath. For over 3 days, soldiers in the Pennsylvania forest massacred each other. The battle took the lives of 51,000 men. I'll say that again, 51,000 men. America lost that many soldiers just in the Vietnam War, and that lasted 13 years. So this 3-day battle was a bloodbath. It was a Union victory, but months after Gettysburg, Lincoln went to Gettysburg and gave an inspiring speech at the site of the battle. It's called his Gettysburg Address, and it's one of the most famous speeches in not just American history, but in history. It was a passionate speech that argued that America should continue to fight this war. Gettysburg was a turning point in the war where many people in the North and South wanted to just stop the war. But Lincoln made an argument that if we stop the war now, then the men who died for nothing. That only by continuing the war does their death stand for something. The speech came at a time when many Americans wanted the war just to simply end. Mass numbers of Americans, mostly Northerners, began to protest the war. And these war protesters were called copperheads, just like a copperhead snake. They're poisonous. And as you can see in this political cartoon, these poisonous snakes are attacking Lady Liberty, who's defending the Union. Lincoln had protesters arrested. But wait a second, Mr. Lowell, I thought the First Amendment gave us the right to freedom of assembly. That is correct. The First Amendment does give us the right to do that. But Lincoln had protesters arrested for protesting against this war. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means the president went against the Constitution. If someone were to sue or take it to court, it could be challenged. But this is not the first or the last time that war protesters will have their civil rights taken away by a president. Because soldiers were fleeing the battlefield and dying in great numbers, both the Union and Confederacy started something called conscription laws. Conscription is also known as a draft. This is where the government forces young men to fight in war. So so many people were dying, fleeing. Nobody wanted to fight. I mean, this is really in the middle of the war. Everyone wants to give up, and both governments in the North and South are forcing people through conscription to fight in this war. In response, there were mass riots in northern cities. People protested the draft, and these riots became known as draft riots. The New York draft riots, New York City draft riots, were some of the most violent. The entire city was riotous for 3 days. During these riots, these draft riots in New York City, there were two targets. One was the rich. They were the rich and the blacks. Rich because they could pay a $300 conscription fee to escape the draft. So if you were rich, you could buy your way out of having to serve in the military. Well, especially the immigrant populations of New York City were very upset by this. The homes of the rich were burned and sacked across the city. Also, another target, of course, were African Americans, because many people felt that this war was being fought for their benefit or to help them. Many blacks throughout the city were lynched and mobbed by people. You can see in this political cartoon Abe Lincoln here, seen as the bad guy in this situation. So, two questions to consider. What was the significance of the Gettysburg Address? And in what ways did Americans react to the stalemate of the war? Remember that a stalemate is when nobody's winning. The war is just at a standstill. Okay, this is our very last chunk here. It's titled The North Wins. Did you know the North won the Civil War, guys? We're living in the United States of America, not the Confederate States of America. I'm going to talk about a couple battles here. One was called the Siege of Vicksburg. It was a critical Union victory that helped end the war. You can see here ironclads going down the Mississippi, attacking the town of Vicksburg. What the capture of this city, this port really did is it gave the Union complete control over the Mississippi River. It fulfilled the Anaconda Plan. It guaranteed the Union victory for the war. Once they attacked and took Vicksburg, really it was a matter of time before the South would be forced to give up. The Civil War also gave rise to a military idea that is oftentimes called total war. This means war is not just fought on a battlefield between troops, but in cities, homes, and all across society. Today, if you think about wars are urban. They happen in cities. There's no escape from it. Everyone's involved, even non-combatants, non-military. Total war really was shown in what was called Sherman's March to the Sea. That's what we're looking at here, a painting. We're looking at a painting of Atlanta, a major city in Georgia, being burned to the ground by the Union soldiers. Union General William Sherman proved this in his what was called March to the Sea. Troops under his command marched from Atlanta all the way to the coastline, and in their path they burned, looted, and pillaged everything in their sight. They literally burned the South to the ground. And although this seems very brutal, Sherman's tactics really did help the North win the war. It was that kind of total war strategy of not just us out on a battlefield, but we're going to take it to your home. In April of 1865, the North and South came together at a place called Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. And here, General Grant and General Lee came together, and the South formally surrendered, thus ending the Civil War. So it was an agreement that both sides would stop fighting, and from there on, the Civil War is concluded, is finished. Almost immediately as the war was coming to an end, the 13th Amendment was passed, and this is an amendment to the Constitution that essentially said that slavery can no longer exist in the United States. It's one of the biggest legacies of this war that it ended slavery. and it prohibited slavery everywhere. Another lasting legacy of this war was, of course, the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Just 5 days after the South surrendered to Appomattox, he was shot in the back of the head by a Confederate named John Wilkes Booth. This is the first time an American president would be assassinated, not the last. And Wilkes was eventually caught, and he was tried. But this makes the rebuilding of the country with the president dead very difficult. Okay, two chunk questions here, guys. What events caused the Civil War to end? And what were some immediate effects to the ending of the war? Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the very end of this introductory slideshow. So once again, if you've watched this video, or most of the stuff I said are in notes in the slide. If you guys actually look at these slides, I have these notes down at the bottom. You'll want to make a copy of the doc again, answer the questions, and then turn them in for credit. If you have any questions, please email me, talk to me. I hope you guys are staying positive, being active, and most importantly, being good to each other. Farewell. Have a good day.